Hey, everybody, welcome to Digital Connections. This is the show that brings in expert advice to connect you with the services and resources to build a successful business and ultimately to create the life of your dreams. This show is for entrepreneurs, business owners, and anyone interested in running a side hustle to their current 9 to 5. One episode at a time, we help you build a successful business through amazing digital connections. I'm your host, Nancee Johnson, a business owner and digital marketer. On my way here, I have found amazing resources that have helped my business grow, and they can help your business thrive too. Everyone needs a friend in digital marketing because digital marketing is about connecting people. So, my friends, today we are talking about the gig economy. What is the gig economy and why does it matter to you as a small business owner? Many of you probably already know the answer to this, but in a lot of cases, it's because you are the gig economy and or because it's an affordable solution, especially for new business owners. The basic definition comes down to temporary and typically flexible jobs that are commonplace positions where a company can hire independent contractors and freelancers instead of full-time employees to fill these positions. At the moment, it is estimated that about 1/3 of the working population already works in some sort of gig capacity. When I was a brand new business owner, I thought that I was working towards a model that was primarily built on a full-time staff. I wanted to have those people that I could trust, that had loyalty and ownership to my company, and perhaps one day I will have a full-time staff. But what I found is that fractional support makes so much more sense. And when that support comes from a trusted source, you end up with a similar dynamic that feels much like the loyalty and ownership that a full-time employee can bring to the table without the same oversight and without the same overhead. But let's jump a little bit further into this with my guest, the amazing Lea Wold, owner of Checkmark Projects. So Checkmark Projects provides companies with fractional and scalable implementation horsepower that allows you to easily prioritize, execute, and maintain new and existing initiatives. Their clients are tech firms and professional and financial service small business owners who lack the internal resources to execute on their own. In short, Checkmark Projects provides perspective, objectivity, and horsepower to find blind spots and get measurable results for your projects and initiatives. Lea formed Checkmark Projects after grinding away for years as a chief operating officer and chief of staff for multiple CEOs, studying Ontology and finally embracing her get it done genius zone. And of course, I am not just hosting Checkmark Projects on Digital Connections. I'm also a client. I know what I'm talking about, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that Lea's services can provide dramatic productivity for your company and for you. So Lea, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see you in your genius zone as
Right.
opposed to where I'm, trying to pull you into mine.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a tables turned, and I like it a lot. It's good to see you do it.
Totally. Well, that actually kind of leads into my first question before we get down to too much business. So tell me what ontology is, and how does someone go about finding their genius zone?
So ontology, like the sort of dummy, which is my favorite way of thinking of it, is sort of like the classification and the philosophy behind why things are the way they are, right? Why people are the way they are, why, and the focus of the stuff that I have studied has really been, people based. Like, why do people behave the way they behave to some extent, right? Like, what are the overarching groups of personality types and, expected behaviors from those personality types, and how does that fit into the world at large? And so I've done some amount of study, I guess I was actually doing the math today. I did about 4 years of study of that so far. And it's I find it super fascinating, but it's also incredibly helpful in what it is that I do, right? Because my clients are from all walks of life, all different kinds of businesses, but ultimately I have to be able to speak to them in a way that they can hear me.
Yeah.
So that's been super, super helpful. And to be able to sort of quickly recognize maybe where some of their pain points are and how to help motivate. And, that's the stuff that I like to sink my teeth into, because it not only helps me in my business, but it helps me just in day to day and maintaining my relationships with people, that I care about.
Yeah.
And then finding your genius zone. I mean, a lot of it is a lot of self-reflection, and it is not very exciting or helpful, or not. It's not very exciting or comfortable. And
Mm, mm,
right, like you really have to pay attention. And there is, I would say do some ontological study. There's a bunch of really great programs out there, and those good programs will hold up a mirror to you to show you who you are in the process and help you get better insight into embracing the thing that you are good at, right? So many
mm,
people, I think, spend too much time trying to put a square peg in a round hole and not realizing that they don't have to do that,
mm-hmm.
right? So, we become business owners often because we find a niche, something that we're really good at, something that we're really passionate about, but then you get bogged down by the business of doing your business,
Yeah.
right? And so that's the thing that I actually excel at. I like to do the business of the business. And coming into my business owner clients has been really eye-opening for me and for them, that they get the space to do the thing that they actually want to be doing instead of the thing that they feel like they have to do to run their business. So
It's funny because
really
when you're,
pay
what'd you
attention to
say?
yourself. I was saying, pay
Mm,
attention to
mm-hmm.
yourself. Like, take notes. If you use a capture tool or something, I like Evernote, but there's a bunch of them out there where you can actually just like write down when you notice that you are really excited or really
Mm,
motivated to get your work done. What are those things that you're doing? Right.
yeah. Yeah.
And if you really hate it and you're really grinding and you can't figure out why, well, write it down, because eventually
Yes.
there'll be a pattern that emerges.
Totally. And what I was going to say is that, when I first started, when I met you, I was like, oh, she's Checkmark Projects. Okay. So she helps with projects and project management and la, la, la. And as I got to know you, I'm like, her company should be called like Checkmark Coaching because, it's more like, and especially now that you've been helping me with some things. I mean, that's what I find is that every time I meet with you, I walk away with something that says, oh, okay, so this is what I was doing. This is how I need to look at it. And it's so helpful to have that that external force to kind of take a look from an objective standpoint, and not because we get so tied into our businesses, we get so tied into the day to day, and to
Yeah.
have somebody be able to just say objectively, hey, look, I know about processes. I know
Mhm.
what you're going through, and this is how it can be made better,
Right.
and that's what I feel like you get when you work with you.
Oh, well, that's awesome. That's great. I like to hear that. And that's, I think when I first started my company, there were a lot of things that I suspected, but I wasn't super confident to be able to like assert, right? Like, I
Mm,
thought that these things might be the case, right? The accountability piece and the objectivity of having a third party. Like, I logically understood how that could work, and that would be a great thing. But now that I'm almost 3 years in, it's like, oh yeah, okay, those sort of theories that I had about what would work and what wouldn't turned out to be pretty much true, more often than not, right?
mhm,
And it
mhm.
is, I think, something that's easily overlooked, that literally just having to show up for another person for a
Oh,
specific purpose,
mhm.
right? It creates a level of rigor that doesn't exist in a lot of places,
That's
right?
right.
So,
Yeah.
I do two things. I have regular recurring meetings, and then I also have working sessions. And the working sessions really are like, okay, great, you have this project. Let's show up and work on it together.
Mm,
And that way you get 2 hours worth of work on it, or however long, 93 hours, whatever the project is. But you might have reprioritized that for yourself and
mhm,
not done it.
mhm.
So instead of getting just your 1 hour that might have not even been a whole hour, might have been pushed around a few times in your calendar, you get double the horsepower to show up and the accountability of having to show up for someone.
Yes, yeah. One of the things that I love that you taught me was that I was not scheduling enough time for just about everything, right? And I had convinced myself that it was only going to take me an hour to do something. I knew better than, I mean, I knew it was going to take me much longer to do it, but it sometimes takes that person with with the logic to say, you sure you can get that done in an hour, huh? I
Like,
think it's
you're
going
going
to
to watch
take you a
that
little
2 hour
longer.
video in 45 minutes? Share with me. How does that work?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, so let's get down to business here. So tell
Sure.
me what your definition of the gig economy is, or how do you think about it?
Yeah. So, until you and I had a discussion about what we could talk about, right? I hadn't given it a ton of thought, other than to know, like, I have clearly jumped headfirst into it, right? And I
Hmm.
hadn't given it a ton of thought, but I've been reflecting on it, and it really, to me, it means, I think that your definition, the variety, the variable, the flexibility, those are the things that are like the defining qualities to me.
Hmm.
And the personal responsibility that it is to be a gig economy worker. If you're someone who, needs an extra sharp kick out of bed in the morning, like, that's probably not going to be the best place for you to live.
Yeah.
Right? Because
Hmm.
you have to be super self-motivated. I mean, you can definitely go through temp agencies and work for big corporations that use gig economy workers.
Hmm.
Microsoft does it. Nintendo's pretty notorious for it. Even, Amazon, like, those are the biggies, in our area that use
Hmm.
those folks. But they really are temporary contracts that are mimic traditional employment, right?
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
of the gig economy as much more variable, right?
Hmm.
Like, I
Hmm.
get to choose the clients that I have. I get to choose the types of jobs that I take on, or that I apply for, or that I, go after and pursue. And yeah,
Well,
I guess there's not that much more to it for me than that, right? Like, but you also have to be someone who's motivated to do that.
yeah, and I think it's interesting, because even gig economy folks that are doing temporary positions at corporations and such, what often happens is that, unfortunately, those are the same people that love the structure that really would do well in a full-time position,
Mhm.
with a company for a long-term employment engagement.
Totally.
And what happens is that is not the case. It is gig economy. It is still temporary employment,
Mhm.
and those positions are subject to end at just about any time. And
Yeah,
what you'll
it's like a
find,
false sense of security.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, and you'll find a lot of people kind of fighting that, right? So their position will end and they'll be like shocked that,
Mhm.
that you're like, it was a temporary position,
Right, and it's
Uh,
funny because the corporations sort of dangle this FTE dream in front of them to keep them motivated, right? Like, the carrot,
yeah,
the carrot
yeah.
that's in front of them, and there'll be 300 temporary workers and 2 FTE positions. Like, the odds are not in your favor
Right,
to get those.
right.
And it's
Mhm.
also like, there's reasons the big corporations are doing that, because
Mhm.
there's tax benefits and, employment, implications and stuff that you were talking about in the intro, of the oversight and the responsibility and the liability that it is to have employees, you
Yeah.
know, and by
Mhm.
using those
Mhm.
temporary contracts, they do some, like, there's benefits to the companies and there's benefits to the workers too. But, there is that sort, I feel, at least for me and the people that I've known who've taken those kinds of contracts, it's, they try and, like, dangle that carrot in front of you, like, ooh, maybe
Absolutely.
you'll be an employee, right?
Yeah,
And more often
yeah,
than not, it doesn't work out.
yeah. So tell me actually, so let's talk about Checkmark and
Yeah.
Checkmark Projects, and tell me a little bit more about your journey to get here.
My journey to get here, I would never have figured that I would land here, right? Like, I am typically what you would consider a good candidate for a W-2 type of a job.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what I had all my life up until 3 years ago. And I have worked in, like you were saying, the operations management, chief of staff, all of that stuff, and coordinating companies on behalf of other people, right? And keeping them organized and keeping the systems running and the machines oiled. And uh, it came time for me to leave the last job that I was at, where I was the chief of staff, and I was looking for a new role, and I was coming to the realization that, when you're a W-2 good worker, the thing that you get is more work, right? But you don't often get more pay or more benefits or anything like that. So it's almost like it's this, like, facade of security, right? Because especially in Washington state, it's an at-will state. Like at any point you could become unemployed, right? Even though like you still show up to work every day. But it could still happen. And the risk is still there, even though there's the illusion that it's not to some extent. And every time somebody leaves and they have to reshift the priorities and who handles what, and that org chart changes, the people who are the most responsible and the most busy end up with more work, right? And more things. And I found myself just not feeling particularly motivated by that. And I interviewed a bunch of places. I have a great relationship with my former boss. Their company was just headed in a different direction than I was feeling. Like, the CEO wants to travel in his RV for a year. And, as the operations manager and the chief of staff, like if they're not actively out there driving business, then I'm just keeping all the plates spinning. And that started to feel a little bit stale. And so I started looking for something else, and he was fully supportive of that, and actually made a whole bunch of introductions to people that he knew in his network, and interviewed with a bunch of them. And some of them were like, I would love for you to do this thing for me because I saw how great you did it for him, but I don't really need someone who's full time. And then there was other companies I interviewed out that were like, yes. And I got job offers, and I was like, something about it just doesn't feel exciting or right. And so I was like, well, I'm going to explore this. Like, maybe I'll just dip my toe into doing some projects, some things, providing fractional support. And I was encouraged by a friend of mine who did the same thing. And it was before the pandemic, before everything kind of shut down, and everybody started working virtually. And I was like, so this was, 3 years ago. I was like, I think I'm going to start trying to do this virtual work thing and see what I can do and build. And almost 3 years later, and I'm here and I'm working on the next iterations of my business. So, I feel like it wasn't exactly a straight line, but
it never is.
I'm so happy, right? The flexibility and my clients and, just, I don't feel like I have to get dragged out of bed in the morning, because I am excited to get up and meet my clients and talk to them and make progress on their projects and help them. And, it's, every day is different. Whereas, in financial services and stuff, sometimes every day is kind of the same.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if you're on the operations side. It just gets a little boring. And, they're technologically, they are typically kind of behind the ball because of all the regulatory concerns. Right. So in what I get to do now, I actually don't have to worry as much about the compliance piece of it and staying that, because there's so much fast changing technology that I get excited to try and help my clients put into place.
Well, I think you just touched on one of the things with the gig economy that is really beneficial. And that is, that, you can hire a CFO for your company, but you're going to have the overhead of their downtime. You're going to have the overhead of their sick time. You're going to have the overhead of, all of those other things that come along with a full-time employee. And yet you get none of the benefits of having someone who's actually out there in the world and dealing with these things. So they know the trends, they know what's happening, they know what needs to happen with your company to help it grow, because they're out there experiencing this in the world at large. Not to say that a CEO can't have those things. I just find
it's a special type of person, right? That's actively pursuing what's happening in the world and keeping an eye on where the company can go.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I love the thought that, for me, when I think about hiring an employee, and I've watched my other colleagues who have businesses similar to me and the struggles that they go through on a daily basis with their staff. And I think I don't know that I need to ever have to have that burden,
Right.
I would rather know that I can hire someone like you to come in who is a responsible human being that knows their job, knows enough about my company, that you have a connection with it. You want to see me succeed because you know that it ultimately is going to help determine your success as well. So it's all of these things that you think that you're getting in a full-time employee, but realistically, you're not necessarily, because the other things outweigh that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's pluses and minuses on both sides, right? There will be, and there's going to be certain people who are more suited to one type of employment versus another. And I always, for the longest time, thought that I was the W-2 type, because I am someone who likes a lot of consistency and a lot of reliability and a lot of structure and whatnot. But it never occurred to me until a few years ago that I could build that for myself. Obviously. But it was like a big light bulb moment that was like, oh, yeah, I have been building, maintaining structures for other companies for most of my career. And why could I not do that for myself? And I get to do it on my terms instead of theirs.
You're building your dream instead of helping them build theirs. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And the skin in the game for me with my clients is, it's my reputation, it's referral business, it's all of that. And, I am naturally someone who shows up and does the things I say I'm going to do. And, if I don't do that, I lose my clients. Right. And I lose my reputation, and I lose that reliability. So, if an employee, starts to step out of line, you have to manage them out, or, put them on a performance improvement plan or something like that. Right. Yeah. And their skin in the game is their paycheck, but it becomes a lot more bureaucratic than having someone who's fractional.
Right. So that kind of brings me to one of my favorite subjects, which is, what are the benefits of working for yourself? I mean, there are a lot to list. I think.
Many. There's so many. There's so many. I'm curious what your favorite things are.
Well, I love being able to have my own podcast. If I want to have a podcast and I think that it's going to benefit my business, I get to have one, whereas before it was kind of like, well, I have no reason to have a podcast. I don't have, why would anyone want to listen to me? I mean, the list goes on and on, right? And I think because I am an entrepreneur, because I am a business owner, it allows me to take some of those ideas that I've kind of always had. It taps into your creativity in such an extreme way. Now, that can be both a benefit and a hindrance, right? Because you're like, oh, shiny thing.
Literally everything is possible, right?
Yes.
And it's just, every single shiny object looks like an opportunity.
But it's also why services like yours are great, right? Because it does help hone in. All right, where are we actually going? What are we trying to do? And it gives you some of that focus. And it doesn't mean that you can't do all of those things on your wish list. It doesn't mean all of those ideas can't eventually be implemented. What it means is, let's use some structure so that those things can actually get implemented. And that's huge, right? So
huge. So my favorite things are the being able to choose my clients, right? I get the chance to be picky, and I get to I get the chance to say, yes, I want to take that on, or maybe we're not a great fit, let me refer you to somebody else who might be, right? And as an employee, you don't get that, right? Your boss comes to you and says, do this, you got to do it, right?
Otherwise, I don't have to like you, but I have to work with you. Yeah.
Right. Like, and and as an employer, you have somebody who might be begrudgingly doing something.
Yes.
And I don't think, I'm pretty honest with my clients when I'm like, it's not my favorite thing to do, but I'll do it for you because I like you. And or just, it has to get done. Right. Like, yeah, maybe it's not my favorite thing, but I still choose to do it because the relationship the benefit of the relationship outweighs the negativity of doing something I don't enjoy doing as much, but also like our friend Tina Mitchell, says like, hire out to your weaknesses. And she's 100% right, you know, because man, life is too short to be doing stuff that you don't want to be doing. And I get to make my own schedule. I get to decide when I don't have to wait for someone to approve my vacation time. You know,
I kind of do, but my husband has to agree.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my husband is a W-2 worker too, but you know, so we're sort of at the mercy of his employer, but you know, that's, if I'm like, oh gosh, like, you know, emergency with my parents or something is going on, like I have a lot more flexibility to reach out to my clients and say, I'm so sorry, like, you know, emergency circumstances have arisen, like, can I rearrange and go handle this thing?
Yeah.
You know, or for me, I can be on my own schedule. I'm not particularly a morning person. And so I can structure my days to accommodate that. Whereas if you work somewhere where the schedule is set for you, it's detrimental to the employer and the employee because they're not getting the best out of that person.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I think it's interesting because as a new business owner, I did not feel like I had a lot of control over that. You know, I felt like I needed to be on as often as possible. I had to be working 24/7. You know, in fact, I do a lot of shows about that very thing, right? Because I believe that part of the reason that you should want to become a business owner is because of that control that you're able to find, right?
Yeah.
But at first, that was not the case, you know, and in fact, I think there's this mythology out there that says, oh, you know, your life is potentially over when you become a business owner because you have to be completely dedicated to that business. Yes, you have to be completely dedicated to that business, but I'm also dedicated to my husband. I'm also dedicated to my kid. You know, I'm also dedicated to my cat. So, you know, I mean, there's other things that have to balance with that. And I think that's what I hope that we get across to the listeners is, you know, hey, look, you've got options, and don't put yourself in a box. Just because you own a business doesn't mean that you're stuck working 24/7. You know?
Not at all. And I encourage lots and lots of boundaries, right? To protect those things, to protect the things that are outside of your work that are important to you. You know, and as a business owner, at least, you know, in what it is that I do, I am not going to be as good of a service to my clients if I am not well rested, if I am not sharp, if I am not, you know, paying attention and able to focus on just them and their projects when I'm with them. You know, I have a joke that a client of mine said to me once. He's like, I know I'm your favorite client. And I'm like, yep, for the next hour, you absolutely are. And it's kind of true, right? Like, I love all of my clients. Don't get me wrong. Like, but there is this, like, I can focus on you and your business. So you have my undivided attention for now. And that's what you need. Right. Like, and when I'm working on your projects, you know, when I have those divided times, I am devoted 100% to my clients. And that's sort of the beauty of it, is that I can tune out the rest. When you're in traditional employment, it's a constant juggle between warring priorities. You know, like, you have to get this done, but you also have to get that done, and you have to pay attention, and somebody else's mood can trigger, you know, a change in the office temperature for the day, you know, all of those things that go into factors of productivity in general. And, you know, the types of folks that I work for and often have the best relationships with come up with a new idea every 5 minutes. And it's impossible to implement all of them. And when in a traditional employment environment, it becomes almost like this giant bucket of rocks that you have to carry around all the time. That's every single idea. And you have to figure out which one is the important rock to pull out and actually work on. Right. And it's okay. I do, you know, I can thrive in that environment, but the beauty of what I do is like, hey, guess what? This is the thing we're focusing on right now. Right. And we're going to eliminate the distractions. We're going to eliminate all the other white noise and focus on this. And if you come up with some new ideas along the way, awesome. We'll capture that. We'll talk about it. We'll see what the resources are to actually implement that and make it a real thing. You know? but this is the thing you told me you that was your priority. So
Right.
let's get back to this thing that you actually hired me for.
Yes. And I will say before we move back to gig economy strictly,
Yeah.
but before we move back to that, I will say that if anyone is having problems finding time in their business, you are the person that they should talk to, because that is what you help people do. You help people find time where they think they didn't have any, you help them actually kind of narrow things down so that that time becomes really evident.
Yeah.
And you help them actually sort through, and they have to kind of make some decisions on what their priorities are, right? And that's part of the
100%.
problem being an entrepreneur. It's difficult to say I want this to be my priority,
It is, because
but you
there's
give
so
them that
many.
accountability.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And there's so many things
Yeah.
and that are priorities. And, the when I very first started my business, one of the things that I said to someone that I was talking about my business with was, my clients need to stop reprioritizing their priorities.
Say that one more time.
My clients need to
Hmm.
stop reprioritizing their priorities.
Got it.
They spend more time reprioritizing their priorities than they do actually getting their priorities done.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah,
It,
totally.
it happens
Totally.
constantly,
Hmm.
constantly.
Hmm.
And my clients are all incredibly intelligent, highly effective, very competent people. But
Hmm.
it's all of those warring priorities that they constantly are juggling and rearranging and trying to figure out how to effectively put them in an order that makes some kind of sense where they can take the next step.
Yeah.
It's, it's like digging around in your junk drawer in your kitchen.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Right?
Well,
There's so
and
many things.
I think that this is kind of the epitome of the gig economy, right? Because we're talking about entrepreneurs, we're talking about business owners, we're talking about people who are out there creating their side hustles, right?
Mhm.
And those are the people that are the gig economy. And realistically, if you, depending on what your mentality is, depending on where you put your focus, that is what's going to depend. That's what's going to decide what your experience is in the gig economy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I also believe that I sincerely believe that our economy in general is moving more in the direction of gig, without a doubt. I think in the next, I haven't done any research on this, which maybe I should have before this show, but I do think that I would imagine that it's going to be at least 60% within the next couple of years of the workforce will be gig. And especially with the pandemic, I think it forced us to have to reevaluate a lot of that for a lot of people. A lot of people were laid off unexpectedly, and they had to quote unquote pivot, and their pivot was the gig economy.
Yeah. Well, what did
Mhm.
they say? Like the necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's the pandemic has sort of forced us into this bottleneck of inventing new ways to do things,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? And the
Mhm.
gig economy is, of course, going to benefit from that,
Yeah.
right? Which actually, the rising tide raises all ships. Like everybody's going to elevate to get better, and there's going to be new things that come out of this that didn't exist before. New technology, new innovation, new outlook, right? Because
Mhm.
what a waste it would be for us to just go exactly back to where we were before.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Like what a waste. Like
Mhm.
if there's going to be all of this tension and turmoil, let's let's do something with it. Let's make ourselves happier. Let's find the thing we want to do. Let's invent new ways of doing things that we had been doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Well, I
incredible.
think, yeah. What do you think about like the opportunities that have come just, recently within the marketplace because we've made this shift to a gig economy? I mean, it used to be they thought of gig economy as just the temporary workers, and
Right.
now it is
Or
grown
artists, right?
exponentially.
Like,
Yeah.
I think
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
the gig economy and that term really started with the artist community, like music performers and stuff. Like that's where that term comes from, is working a gig. And now the definition is massively expanded to
Hmm.
all different types of industries and work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, the benefit that I see is that more people get to determine what they really want to do on
Mm-hmm.
their terms and at their schedule. And, there's the ability to work remotely. I work exclusively remotely.
Mm-hmm.
And that means I'm no longer tied to my place of employment, right? I'm no longer tied to having to drive in. I'm no longer tied to having to go to a very specific place. Now, of course, there's always going to be industries where you absolutely have to go to the building
Of
to do
course.
work,
Of
right?
course.
Not everything can be done virtually, but there is a bunch of traditional jobs that never were thought of as being able to be done virtually that are now done virtually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that trust and that reliance on the technology is only going to increase, in the years to come as a result of being forced into this bottleneck.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think too, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with physical space, right? Because
Oh my gosh, yes.
you're watching physical spaces and what we utilize
Commercial
them
real
for
estate
changing.
and
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And there's
absolutely.
all sorts of really cool, interesting ideas out there on how to leverage space. And, I actually, you'll love this because I haven't told you about this yet, but I'm like, okay, I got to have at least like one day a month where I have a strategy day. Right. And I'm like, I'm going to go and get myself an office space for one day, where I can just, peel off and go on my own and do strategy thinking. That's what I do for that day,
Well, I mean, that's the business, like the offsite retreats,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
You're just creating that for yourself.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And it's so easy these days because the office spaces are aplenty to go out and rent, and it's
Mhm.
great, right? But then what I'm looking forward to is watching what actually comes from this new generation of thinkers. And I mean, I'm included, you're included in this new generation of thought around it. Maybe it has always been done that way. And maybe these are the things that we've done, but guess what? There's a whole new subset of just different ideas that have never even come into play
Mhm.
because we now think this way, right? We are not tethered to a place, we're not tethered to a job, and we're not tethered to an employer
Right.
necessarily, right? And having that freedom is amazing, and I think it's what the gig economy is leading towards, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Mm-hmm.
have quite a few friends now that are digital nomads. They have their own business,
Yes. Uh-huh.
right? And they have an RV that gets Wi-Fi, right? I
Yes.
actually don't even I would love to know how that works. I haven't looked into it. I would love to be able to figure that out. But
I
anyway,
have, I have, and I'm excited to get there one day.
yeah, yeah. Like
Hmm.
I have friends like that literally just travel all over the place. I kid you not. I was having a meeting with my friend and she's like, "Oh yeah, like I'm up at the Arctic Circle right now, blah blah blah." And I'm like, "There's Wi-Fi at the Arctic Circle? I had no idea." But like, we get to see these parts of the world and still like maintain your income and your lifestyle, or to build the lifestyle that you want, because
Hmm.
the technology is so amazing that you can
Yes.
actually get Wi-Fi signal at the Arctic Circle. Like
Right.
never before has that ever been a thing. Like
Right.
it's
I just
incredible.
I just saw a motorhome that actually that has one of those extenders off of it, but it has a glass floor so you can go out by a lake and your thing extends out over the lake so that you isn't that awesome?
Oh, that's
I just was like, okay,
amazing.
I want that. Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
I want. That's my
that's
office.
amazing. I love that. And it's
Uh,
interesting too, because I think that some of the byproduct of this,
mhm.
the digital nomad life and the gig, like all of this virtual work that's able to be done now, I think we're going to start to see, like you were saying, like a change in the real estate, right? Commercial real estate. But I also think we're
Absolutely.
going to see it in residential real estate, because you can live anywhere, but also like the redefinition of what it means to be stable, what it means
Mm.
to be financially secure, right? Because my friend that I was just mentioning that is at the Arctic Circle, like she's killing it, right? Like she's incredibly smart. She's awesome. I just love her to bits. But she's she struggles a little bit against the traditional dynamic with her family. Her and I've had discussions about this because she doesn't own a home, right? She has the RV that she lives in, and the way that they would define her success, right, monetarily or, what have you, financially, they look at her and they're like, no, I don't know. Like, is this really working? And she's like, do you want to see my stock portfolio? Right. You know what I mean? Like, she's killing it. And but the way that they're defining that is the traditional definitions of, her net worth is probably, like, I don't know, but, like, her net worth is going to be high, and it's in less traditional or more like not middle class sort of the ways of defining it. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I think it is creating different classes, and without a doubt, So tell me
the definitions that we know, right?
What's that?
It's changing some of the definitions that we grew up with about what it means to be successful, and it's, I don't have children, and I have an aunt that is a little older than me, obviously, but she didn't have children either. And it was much harder for her to get through to people that she could still be successful, that she could still be fulfilled, that she could still have a worthwhile life without having the traditional mom role. And, it's a little easier on me. And I think it's going to be a little easier on the generation after me, me.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me that those definitions of what success look like are changing, and what fulfilled looks like are changing based on, like, hey, like, let's not just do the thing we're expected to do because we're expected to do it. Let's do the thing because we want to do the thing.
Yeah. And I would say that is the embodiment of the gig economy right there. Right.
Yeah. 100%.
All right. So we're almost out of time, but tell me, what have you learned that others need to know about working in the gig economy?
It's not as scary as it seems.
Yeah.
It's not as scary. And you got to be organized.
Yep.
You got to be organized.
And that's coming from my expert right there.
That's what I would say. Yeah. What about, I'm curious, what would you say?
Oh, I would say something very similar, right? I mean, I think that's probably my biggest takeaway, is that I spent a long time scared to come out into the world of the gig. And, I'm glad that I did, because it's a great place to be. Yeah. Yeah.
Now we just have to solve the healthcare thing.
Sure. Well, we got some other problems that we can work on. We can do it.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, decouple. The flip side is, like, the other thing I've learned is we've got to figure out how to decouple employment from healthcare.
Yes. Well, yeah, obviously, because it's not going to work in the gig economy.
Right. And we're going to reach critical mass at some point in our society where that has to change. So, and there's lots of organizations that you turned me on to that are working really hard and diligently at solving that problem.
Yeah.
And they're good people too.
Right.
So good.
And in fact, you know what? I'm going to have to do a show about that.
Please do.
All right.
I need to know.
Okay. All right. So, Leah, thank you so much for the conversation. Before we take off today, I want to leave everyone with our digital marketing tip of the day. So I know this may sound obvious for some of you, but for people that are trying to build out an e-commerce experience for the first time, I have found that this is something that gets missed very often when they try to do things on the cheap, which there's nothing wrong with starting there, but you should always have a plan that allows you to grow, and that will probably include upgrading your website at some point. Two things that get missed if you hire a friend to build a website include Google Analytics and Google Merchant Services. I know it's big business and Google doesn't pay me to advertise for them, but I know what it takes to create ads and build an effective search engine optimization plan. And when these things are missing, it is a painful experience all the way around. Trying to add them later doesn't always work seamlessly, and it will cost you more in the end, which really is just another way to say create create a great strategy to begin with so that you don't have to pay later on. So a huge thank you to my guest, Lea Wold. You can find Leah at Checkmark Projects at checkmarkprojects.com. Please make sure to follow us, subscribe, and like us wherever you get your podcast. You can find this episode and previous shows along with contact information for me and all of our guests at our website, digitalconnections.us. Have a great week and tune in next time for another amazing digital connections for your business.